Okay, well, welcome to the Knowledge Lab. Welcome to this, what is for Celia and me, a strange gathering. We didn't really think when we sent messages to people across the world in various countries and continents that people would actually come and be here. But it's absolutely fantastic to see everybody here. Thank you very, very much. There's going to be a lot of this evening, so as soon as you get the slightest chance, get some canapes and some more champagne out there. Because we don't want to take it home with us. Okay, I'm going to introduce the compares, and then a whole complex set of things is going to take place, of which I'm only vaguely aware. The first compare that I'm going to introduce has disappeared. Lulu Healy. Oh, Celia just said I'm doing Lulu, so okay, let me do Alison instead. Alison Clark-Wilson, who's a reader here at in the Knowledge Lab. She was my one from last, I think, successful PhD student. Is that true? You mean there was lots of unsuccessful? Okay. And they're going to compare the proceedings, which basically means they're going to tell you what to do. And you're going to do Lulu.
I'm going to do Lulu. Just in case people don't know Lulu, will you put your hand up? Now, Lulu, most people know because she's been around a very long time. No, the reason is she's not as old as we are, but she went to the she went to the school where Richard was head of maths. She was very well known as being very naughty. It was a long time ago. Yeah, it is. But it's wonderful, and now, of course, she's professor at King's College, and we're absolutely delighted. She's back from Brazil, where she did. We're so glad some people from Brazil are here, and so it's really wonderful she's back, and thank you both for all you've done. Now, I think it's over to you, isn't it?
What do you think?
I don't know. I have a PowerPoint if I can't. I have to say, now, did anybody wonder? This was Alison who did this. Alison found this photograph. What year was it?
We think 1987.
We think 1987. We had no idea where this was and where it came from. Yeah. But we have a clue now where it came from, because that is where it's from. And there's somebody here, somebody you will recognise. He's here, Cronis Kinnegold. The thing about Cronis, he was Richard's first PhD student, and we're very happy that he's here. So, now... Oh, you want to say something about that one?
Yes, I just want to relay to you the latest piece of research, longitudinal research in the Knowledge Lab, where we tried to work out, using a randomized control trial, whether height above sea level is related to mathematical ability. This is my son, Joe, 30-odd years ago. Joe, where are you? Okay. This little face peeping out here is Amy, my daughter, who's a tiny bit, not that much taller now, but... Okay. Thank you. Can you press the magic button?
No, I think it's now we're introducing Becky.
Okay.
I think that's...
Where is Becky? Oh, right. You try standing on the cross and see.
Supposed to pass it to me. I'm not quite sure. There seems to be a lot of people introducing other people.
Never mind.
We'll follow the script, otherwise it would all be a complete disaster. It's a really big privilege for me to be part of this event. I have to say that it was Alison who did all the organising. Like many of you who are here today, Richard and Celia have kind of touched every part of my professional development, every part of my professional life, and quite a large part of my personal life as well. So I'm really, really happy to be here and to be given this role. I have to say I'm much more nervous now than I was doing the presentation earlier today. I would like to pass over to our first speaker, who is Becky Francis, the current director of UCL Institute of Education. Thanks, Becky.
Thanks so much. Well, it's a pleasure to welcome everyone. It's brilliant to see so many people here today. And I do understand that it's quite an international crowd, with colleagues as far afield as Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, the USA, Canada, and I hear Brazil as well. This is amazing. And I'm really delighted to open this celebration, having myself just flown in from China this morning to be with you, especially for this. So we're truly international. And I'm equally delighted to find two colleagues who have worked for the IOE for over 30 years, and still, as you see, they're in good spirits. So this is wonderful. I actually passed my 66-week mark at the IOE last month. Celia and Richard's combined 66 years here are a wonderful landmark for us to mark and celebrate. And so I've just got a couple of minutes to talk about what they've achieved and contributed to the world's #1 Faculty of Education. And it's on our front door, it can't be denied. I'm assuming that other speakers this evening will focus on Celia and Richard's intellectual contribution to the fields of mathematics education and technology and enhanced learning. So I'm just going to pick out a couple of their career highlights to really just set the scene for you this evening. First of all, Celia. Having started out as a teacher in London schools, Celia was appointed Professor of Mathematics Education at the IOE in 1984. And in this role, and through a myriad of other appointments along the way, Celia's been a leading champion of mathematics education as an academic discipline and as a professional practice. To that end, Celia has been a TV presenter, advisor to research councils around the world, chair of the Joint Mathematical Council of the UK, a founder member of the UK Advisory Committee on Mathematics Education, the UK Government's Chief Advisor for Mathematics, founding director of the National Centre for Excellence in the Teaching of Mathematics, and ... President of the Institute of Mathematics and its Applications. And alongside, she served as Dean of Research at the IOE, 2002 to 2004, as well as directing over 30 research and consultancy projects. Her energy, it seems, is boundless. And there's not time to list all of Dame Celia's awards, but they include being the first recipient of the International Commission of Mathematics Instruction Hans Freudenthal Medal and of the Royal Society Kavli Education Medal. And Celia's contribution as a female role model in STEM education was recognised through her 2016 Suffrage Science Award. And to Richard. Richard also started his career as a teacher, but left the profession in 1982 to direct the first study in England on programming and education. He joined the IOE in 1985 and was appointed Professor of Mathematics Education in 1996. He later served as the IOE's Pro-Director for ICT in 2003 to 2004. And perhaps the most important part of Richard's legacy for us is this very building, the IOE's Knowledge Lab. Richard founded the lab in 2004 as a research centre for the application of technology in education in its broadest sense. He served as its co-director until 2016 with a mission to understand and design ways in which new digital technologies can transform education, learning and teaching. And the lab was a highly innovative conception, bringing together computer and social scientists from a broad range of fields, from semiotics to ubiquitous technologies. It launched with £6 million in government funding and has continued to secure a string of prestigious grants. In recognition of the lab's contribution, the Chancellor of the University of London, Her Royal Highness Princess Anne, visited the lab in 2014 as part of its 10th anniversary celebrations. And you'll hear from Richard's successor as director of the lab, Professor Kerry Jewett, shortly. And that's just one example of Richard's leadership. Richard also, having served as Deputy Scientific Manager of Kaleidoscope, the European Network of Excellence for Technology Enhanced Learning from 2003 to 2007, and as Director for the ESRC/EPSRC Technology Enhanced Learning Research Programme from 2007 to 12. Richard, too, has received numerous accolades. His work recognised by, among others, LEGO, the Institute of Mathematics and its Applications, and the Academy of Social Sciences. So, Richard. And as many of you here are mathematicians, I should add in a few numbers, shouldn't I? So, taken together, Celia and Richard have raised over £10 million in research funding across 50 projects, including 17 funded by the UK Research Councils. They've published 12 books and nearly 100 refereed articles in top-tier journals in mathematics education and in education more broadly. Many of their 32 doctoral students now hold senior positions in education and lead research programs in their own countries. And again, I think this is one of the major ways that Celia and Richard have been so influential across the whole field. Celia and Richard, I've only touched on your career highlights, but what a tremendous contribution. Thank you very much. We're all in admiration, aren't we, of your tireless efforts to open doors to knowledge and understanding by using digital technologies. And what's been especially striking is the way that you've combined deep questions about how people learn with exploration of how to leverage digital technologies to support that learning, as well as commitment to blending that high-quality research and innovation with actionable and sustainable practice. And I'm looking forward to hearing more from our other speakers on that. But before I hand over to our next speaker, just one more number. It's for me to say, on behalf of no fewer than 7 different IOE directors over the period, several of whom are here tonight, a huge thank you for your loyalty and service to the Institute over so many years. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Becky. We'd like to invite the current director of the UCL Knowledge Lab to the stage now, which is Professor Kerry Jewett.
Thank you. And you can kind of imagine after the talk that Becky's just given, like what a little baby director I feel like in the shadow of Richard, and differently so Celia. And so I'm going to make a slightly more local talk and a slightly more personal talk, in the sense that we literally, and I mean literally, none of us would be standing here if it weren't for Richard. We wouldn't be standing here because of his vision that he had to develop this lab and to seek the funding and to kind of literally go out and find the building, I think it was in the end, wasn't it? I mean, so it's a momentous place. And I want to say that, and I'm very close to everybody that works here, and this really is the best place I have ever worked. And I came here kicking and screaming in 2004 because I wanted to stay in the main building. And this was very new, and I wasn't sure what was going to kind of happen in this new space. Say? Yeah, I'm still not sure what will happen here. But anyway, Richard has created an amazing environment for all of us to work in. And I think what's really important is that I came as a contract researcher, and I'm now a professor and a director of the lab. And many of the other people who are here who've been Richard's either PhD students or colleagues along the way, that his mentorship of all of us has been outstanding. And so is Celia's. When I watch the two of them working with their research teams, and the kind of intellectual generosity that they give to all of us is rare. And I think it's that collegial generosity that has created such a wonderful environment here for us to work in. And part of that is the ambition that these two have had for us. So the ambition, which Richard has said on many occasions, is that all of us will become professors and move out into the world. And so I'd like to invite everybody who has come across their paths over the last combined 66 years, who is now a professor, to pop their hands up. Okay, that's pretty cool, isn't it? Oh, right. And so I think in that sense, the legacy of Richard and Celia's work is very embodied in all of us, and that's really important, that as any of us retire, our work carries on through the people that we've worked with and the people that we've supported and developed as academics, as scholars. And also, I think what both Richard and Celia have is an immense care for the people that work in the lab. For the lab itself as an entity, but for us as people. And I think that's really important in creating a wonderful place to work in. And in making us better academics as well. And I remember some time ago being absolutely exhausted and being completely distraught that I hadn't got a grant and going and crying all over Richard. And instead of ushering me out of his office as quickly as he possibly could, he gave me a hanky, which I think you must have had some in your drawer for previous exchanges, and said to me, it's fine. This is all going to be okay. And you are going to get a project, and just stop worrying and just slow down. And that kind of advice from someone who's so experienced is just invaluable for a mid-career researcher at the time. And so I've benefited immensely from the care of both Celia and Richard, and I know that people here and people who still work in the lab have. So I'd like to thank you for me, but from everybody else as well. Thank you very much.
It's my great pleasure now to invite Professor Harvey Goldstein. I knew him when he was Professor of the Mathematical Science Group of Institute of Education when I first started here. He is now Professor of Social Statistics, University of Bristol.
Do I actually need a microphone?
They're recording it.
Then I'll use a microphone. Okay. I was very flattered to be asked by Richard and Celia to speak here, but I was also rather hazy about what I could possibly say in front of such an audience. So I happened to meet Celia and Richard a few weeks ago, and I said to Celia, what should I talk about? So she said, well, I just talk about anything. And Richard, who was hovering in the background, piped up and said, so long as you don't tell the truth. So you'll be able to judge after this. Now, I want to claim some credit because I was one of the people that was responsible for Celia coming here. I was on her appointing committee. And of course, the fact that Celia came here meant that Richard came here a year or so later. So you wouldn't have had this party had it not been for me. So just remember that. Now, I'm going to get a little bit more personal than the previous speaker. I'm not a maths education expert. I really can't contribute anything intellectual to this gathering, at least in that sphere. So I'm, although I do remember with great fondness the early days of maths education and Logo, not Lego, Logo, and bringing my 8-year-old son to play with the computers here. It was actually wonderful, and I played as well. And I have very happy memories of that. And also lots of things to do with statistics education that you two were very kind of supportive of, and I was involved in at that time. So I'm not going to say anything too intellectual about maths education, but one of the things that I do remember about being here with these two was what fun it was. So, with your permission, I'd like just to be a bit anecdotal. As a scientist, I think this is sometimes allowed. And tell you about some of the things that none of you, I think here, with one possible exception, will know about Celia and Richard. And these are really rather important things about you know about their intellectual achievements. Well, let me tell you about one or two other things. You will all cast your minds back, those of you that are familiar with British politics, to 1992. There was an election here in 1992. Some of you will remember it as the election that Neil Kinnock lost for the Labour Party. It so happens that the three of us very nearly reversed that result. Now, this is not well known, but I'll tell you how it happened. You two have probably forgotten, actually. We were pretty aghast with what was going on educationally at the time. This was the major administration. And so we wrote a letter, the three of us, to the Times, which, amazingly, they published, which was highly critical of the then Tory government's educational policy. And we were kind of sitting around having a drink about this, thinking how wonderful it was, but really expecting it would have no effect at all. And then one Saturday evening, we live in Muswell Hill, and I went round, or I was sent out to the local Indian takeaway for our evening meal. And as I walked into the Indian takeaway in Muswell Hill, who should be sitting there right at the back of the restaurant? They were the only people eating, were two people who I knew quite well. One was a member of the same governing body, same primary school as me, and the other was the chief education advisor to 10 Downing Street. I won't go into how I knew these people, but there he was. And so I strolled over, being a nice kind of guy, and said good evening to them, at which he stood up. He was a very small man. He stood up and glared at me and said, "How dare you publish that letter in the Times? You could lose us the election." To which I said, that was the point of the letter. Well, he was in the middle of his meal, so he left the meal. I walked back to the counter to collect my takeaway. He followed me, saying various things which I can't repeat. And I tried, being a nice guy, I tried to calm him down. And eventually, this all sort of subsided, and we went our own ways. And then I realized I'd done quite the wrong thing. What I should have done is said, "Look, Brian," and goaded him to the point where he would have stood me up against the wall and thumped me. And I could just imagine the headlines. Chief Government Education Advisor hits leading educational professor of statistics, and there's a court case and everything, and they would have lost the election. So that's all down to the letter that three of us wrote. You remember that? Yeah, you remember. You remember that. And the second thing, which I'll sort of tell you, is another thing which I think one person here does know about. There are two people. I see someone at the back smiling. And that is, it was around about 1996, I think. There was a particularly unfortunate appointment to the professorial staff at the Institute of Education, which some of us were very upset about. And we proceeded to interact with this person, who I can't name, and we learnt an awful lot about the future Labour government, the Blair government's educational policy. So come 1997, when we elected a Labour government, none of us were at all surprised at the policies that came out. We've been pre-warned, but we did have a lot of fun during those years at probing and finding out what was really going to happen after the 1997 election. So that period for me, and it was intellectually stimulating, of course, was a period I really enjoyed. It was great fun. We had a nice time, and I really want to thank both of you for being superb, supportive colleagues and making my time at the Institute, apart from everything else, really worthwhile. So thank you both for inviting me and for making that such a great time of life.
Thank you very much, Harvey. Could I invite next Sir Martin Taylor to come and speak? I've lost Martin in the room. So Sir Martin, we're very delighted that you've joined us. I'm going to pass you this one. And Martin is the Master of Merton College and a Professor of Pure Mathematics.
Alison, I was promising you clip on.
I can clip it on you. We can do that. We have the technology.
Yeah, well, on the edge. And I have to stand on the cross. Now, most of what I have to say actually concerns Celia, because I've worked a lot with Celia in my life, but just wanted to say on behalf of my wife and myself what good fun Richard and Celia are. And I remember in a bar in Shanghai and Beijing, I had been learning Mandarin, and I said to the barman, this is a long time ago, so I probably get the word wrong, I wanted 4 beers, so I said, sure. And Richard looked witheringly at me. He said, good God, do you expect them to understand that? It's far more guttural. And then the barman came over with 4 beers. So, one up Martin Taylor, I think, there. So most of what I have to say is about Celia, and I want to really start, I'd say, in the middle a little bit, because I want to tell you about her role in the formation of this advisory committee for maths education, because as far as I'm concerned, Celia, it's one of the best things I did in my life, and we did it together. So this is where I wish to begin, but I have to frame it a little bit, this ACME, as I think it's been called before. So in the late 1990s, I think everyone would agree that maths education was not in a good shape. And this segues beautifully from what Harvey was saying, because there was a Labour government coming in, and there were high hopes. But there was one great problem in mathematics, and that is that we were a pretty disunited community. And in particular, there was one element that I had my eye on, and that was the Joint Maths Council. And I think, looking at it, they had something like more than 20 different members in them. And it was very hard to get a common opinion out of them. And then the word came that Celia had been elected president and that she was a good thing and would be easy and good to work with. So it was agreed that Celia would write a letter on behalf of the whole maths community, and that we would have a meeting with her. So there was the Royal Society, which I was largely representing, and the learned and professional societies. And it was a very strange meeting, because as soon as Celia appeared at the door, 2 men in grey suits moved over to her and took her away. And it was explained to me, they said, well, Celia had written a letter, but it wasn't quite the letter we were hoping for. And so we sat there drumming our fingers on the table, talking about the football and things like that. And then, about 10 minutes later, Celia reappeared, brandishing a new letter and beaming at us. And then she was introduced to us at this point. And we thought, what a really nice person. We can really do business with Celia. And at this point, to be honest, the Royal Society took things over a little bit. And they took Celia's letter, and they covered it in more seals than you could imagine. It looked like something from the Magna Carta. And it was sent off to the relatively new Minister for Schools, Jackie Smith. And we waited, because we said, could we have this ACME, this mechanism for communicating between the maths community and government? And the answer came back, no. Well, the Royal Society, I have to tell you, isn't used to no. And it caused consternation. You know, the president and the vice presidents went into conclave. What are we to do? What are we to do? So they sent off some advisors to speak to Jackie Smith's advisors. And a very strange message came back. They said, you should read the letter more carefully. If you read it properly, it says yes and get on with it. So there was a strange business. And there, Acme was born, as I say, it was one of the best things, I think, that ever happened in my life, and I'm really proud of that. But I said I'd jump in the middle because it's such a big thing. Time-wise, I should go back, if I'm talking about Celia, to the other place that I come from, that's Manchester. I was there for 25 years. Celia did her first degree in Manchester. She did a maths degree. As you might expect, she got a first-class degree. And you got the Dalton Prize, didn't you?
Yeah,
Yes.
nobody's heard of it.
Yeah. No. But they've heard of Dalton, Celia. So just relax. When you walk up and down High Street, you'll probably see Timpson shops. Well, the heiress to the Timpson Empire was a lady called Dame Kathleen Orenshaw. And she died about 7 or 8 years ago. And she left money for maths in Manchester University. And who was the first choice of lecturer for this Orenshaw lecture? It was two people. It was you speaking alongside Ian Stewart, wasn't it? So Celia loved Manchester. You had a great time there. But I think I can say also Manchester loves Celia as well. Another thing I just want to dwell on, this is more light entertainment. So Harvey said you can go for anecdotes if you like a bit, and I'm really going to seize that and run with it. I happened upon a YouTube video quite recently. It was Celia and Johnny Ball's programme called Fun and Games. And I just want to put over to you what an extraordinary programme this now looks. By today's standards, of course, I'm being a bit unfair. The first thing you notice are the clothes. They look as if they just come off a Monty Python set. It's really very, very odd. And then you're also a little unnerved with the way the programme begins, because it goes with a little ditty, which I will not attempt to sing, but I'll read it out. It says, "Life can be a puzzle, but when answers are hard to find, try some mathemagics. It's sure to stretch your mind." So it's pretty cheesy. And then the camera pans to the audience, and your worst suspicions are confirmed. It's full of elderly ladies who looked as if they've been lured out of a bingo hall. And then Celia, at the conclusion of the programme, the 4 presenters have 4 different boards, and on them are written, "See you next year." Oh. Celia had C on her board, and she wiggled it around with tremendous energy. She really, most impressive. Now, I now want to take you back to post-Acme years, because now we have Charles Clarke, who was the Secretary of State for Education, and being with her Acme work, this entailed quite a few visits for Celia to go and see Charles Clarke. And he's a very nice man, but I guess it might have been a bit intimidating, because he used to keep a pair of boxing gloves on his desk to deter the foolhardy, as he used to put it. So you overcame that, you impressed him, and Charles realised that there was not actually a voice for mathematics in government, and so he created a distinctive role for you, the government's chief advisor for education, and the press, of course, dubbed you the maths czarina. And you did very many good things. It was a platform for your passion for making mathematics interesting, and you used it to great effect. But there's one thing I'm going to pick on, and that is what you did for further mathematics, which looked as if it might die. And why have I picked on that? It's because when I was at school for 7 years in secondary school, and I think further maths was the best thing I ever did. And I would have been mortified had it withered. So we owe you a great debt for saving that. So a very successful period as Tsarina. Well, almost. There was one minor hiccup, wasn't there, Celia? Celia was handed a confidential copy of the Smith report with the strict instructions to not make it public. Can you imagine her anguish when she left it on the train? But this is always the way with these things. It seemed dramatic at the time, and it just passed away, and no one ever really knew about it, I don't think, except me. So these anecdotes, they're all really just designed to convey really 2 things. Firstly, Celia's passion for communicating the love of mathematics, and that mathematics is exciting. And also I want to highlight your extraordinary high level of achievement. The fact that she was awarded the OBE and then the DBE has already been mentioned. But what just to conclude, I've got 3 things down here. We had John Holman here. Something he said I should say was, I do believe that the acceptance that M is the foundation of STEM, while obvious to mathematicians and scientists, was one of the many key policy breakthroughs that Celia achieved. Well, that's pretty fantastic. You could throw in further maths as well. The second quote actually comes from my wife Sharon over there. So Sharon is a teacher. She was in charge of maths in her school, and she sat on some Royal Society panels. And she said, Martin, tell them how wonderful the teaching resources are that came from the National Centre for Excellence of Teaching Mathematics. That was a huge thing. Can you give Celia a round of applause for that alone? I think that's magnificent what you did there. And then just to conclude, you heard earlier that Celia got the Royal Society Kavli Medal. Well, there's a little bit of a story behind that, because we didn't have an education medal. We had something called the Faraday Medal, which was for communication of science and mathematics, not the same thing at all. And so it was I actually who created the Kavli Medal, but it's not an inside job. I wasn't on the panel that awarded it, but the very first panel that convened gave you that prize, Celia. And here, oopsie daisy, and here is what their citation says, because it's pretty impressive. In recognition of her outstanding contributions to research and maths education. Because for me, that says it all. Well done, Celia.
Thank you very much indeed, Martin. And finally, can I invite Professor Diana Laurillard, very good colleague here at the lab.
Thank you very much. And thank you. And it's, I must say, a great honor for me to be able to talk about Celia and Richard's work here. I'm going to begin and end with knowledge in a frantic attempt to try and talk about my intellectual life with Richard and Celia. And this is because one of the ideas that's characterized their work is the centrality of knowledge to education and learning. That's why Richard called it the Knowledge Lab. That's why he invited Seymour Papert to come to open it in 2004. The conceptual development of mathematical knowledge, that was the focus of their work on MyGen, their project for the ESRC and EPSRC Technology Enhanced Learning Program. And Richard was also director of that whole program, all 8 projects. And 3 out of those were actually located here in the lab. But the most important thing about them was that all 3 continued long after the end of the funding. MyGen, Celia and Richard's project, led to Cornerstone Mathematics. Now it's used in hundreds of schools. Kashka's ECHOS project, I'm sure Kashka is here somewhere, I can't see her, was extended to ECHOS 2 and then on to TARDIS and on training young adults, regulation of emotions and social interaction. And then My Learning Designer tool, which is an online tool attracting still hundreds of users every day and now being upgraded to a UCL tool for academics. And then I discovered again this evening, Margaret Cox, who's also here, had another of the projects on the haptic technology for educating dentists on how to deal with teeth. And that's now progressed to surgeons knowing how to deal with knees with haptic technology. So another one, which has continued on and still has its legacy. So that's just 3 examples of Richard's program, which has left this extraordinary legacy, both to the lab and to the wider world. I first met Richard in 1983 at a computer-assisted learning conference, and we argued about logo, because I'd been to MIT, and I'd not been impressed with that so-called evaluation data that Seymour Papert and his team had got around logo, but Richard had actually used it, and he'd worked with it, and he understood what it could offer. And his passion for logo made me think again, and of course, he was right. That underlying concept of constructionism that's embedded in logo is something which is critically important, and constructionism has so much to offer. And then I first met Celia in 1989 when I was chairing a new course at the Open University on computers and education. And you can imagine at that point we were desperate to find a good external advisor. Unfortunately, I knew about Celia's work, and she was one of the very few people who could bring to us some practical findings of technology in the classroom. But with Celia, that was mixed with a genuine vision of what computers could actually do to improve learning. So it was enormously valuable to us. And that's what they both bring to the work at the lab. That mission to make things better, to make things happen, to improve things, to be builders, to be makers, to be designers, to be engineers, who are the people who always try to make things work better, and especially classroom teaching work better. And I've taken constructionism to heart, and I can now see it happening everywhere, underpinning our work in the lab that we do now. That development of knowledge can be represented not just as a social constructivist would, but also as a constructionist would, that engineer or builder, someone who wants to make something and then make it better. Because in that process, you discover something about that little system you've just made. And some aspect of your conceptual knowledge you will now be able to build on further. Richard and Celia have always worked on how technology can offer new ways for us to interact with knowledge. And that's the enduring program of research that I think they've fostered here. And now, under the new director, Carey, it persists in an even wider variety of ways than we could ever possibly have imagined back in 2004. So now what we see in the lab, just look around you. That is a superb legacy of your work, Richard and Celia, and we thank you for that.
I'm going to say a few words and then I've got to go and use my PowerPoint. But I just want to say, Richard, you've got to say, I want first of all to say we have 3 directors here at the Institute of Education. We're absolutely delighted, and thank you, Becky, for speaking. And there's Peter Mortimer at the back, thank you very much for coming. And Jeff Whitty is here somewhere. Is there, who is part of the building of the lab. So we really want to say that. And Richard, you wanted to say something about the generosity of our colleagues.
It's probably not the right place. At some point, I'll say it now.
I'll say it now. And I can go back and do my
I just
PowerPoint.
wanted to say thank you so much. Many, many people here took my suggestion, our suggestion, that rather than a present for us, that you would make some contributions. People might want to make some contribution to the Parkinson's UK charity. And I was completely wiped out by the response. We have now collected £1,370.
Amazing, absolutely amazing.
So thank you very much if you're one of those people, and thank you.
Yeah.
Indeed.
No, that's it.
Me now.
No, I'm going to do a PowerPoint now. You know, I can't do anything without PowerPoint. Now, can I stand here? Is it all right? Yeah. So what we've done, I'm mic'd up. Actually, we did prepare a PowerPoint of all our 66 years, and we, actually, there's 152 slides, and we thought that's a bit self-indulgent for you guys. So what we have done, many of you will know that what we've done, we pick out landmarks. So we're picking out a few things. The whole 150 slides are going to be going round after we finish talking, and there will be photographs of a lot of you. Because I've found all these photographs of all these wonderful times we've had all over the world at different meetings where we've learnt so much. So hopefully you'll spot your photograph when we stop. But we just have a few landmarks we've picked out. And we're going to interchange. And actually Becky Francis did say something about our landmarks, but we're going to give a bit of the inside story with some of them. So this is it's going to be brief. Well, this is the Kresge Hall at MIT, for those of you who don't know. And off a group of us went in 1983. And I went with Ros Sutherland, who's here somewhere, I hope, yeah. There. And we went, and Richard went, probably other people were there. But Richard was on the panel. A panel of 4 people who were doing a keynote presentation. This Kresge is enormous. And we were so excited about Richard doing this panel. And he was the 4th speaker on the panel. And we were sitting in the front row, weren't we, Rose, waiting for Richard to speak. And Paul Goldberg, who is here somewhere, was chairing the panel. And oh God.
This is my first, not just my first keynote speech, my first speech in a public audience.
Yeah. And it's massive. And Paul was there chairing the meeting, and each speaker was supposed to speak for 10 minutes. And Richard was the fourth. And Paul, being such a nice man, so the first speaker spoke for about 10 minutes. The second speaker spoke for about 10 minutes. And the third speaker spoke on and on. And I would say her name, but I think it might be a bit unfortunate. But she went on and on and on. And we were all sitting, but what about Richard? But what about Richard? And I think you had 1 minute, did you? Well, not even 1 minute. He just said, I'm Richard Noss from London, and then sat down. So that was his first big keynote. And luckily, Paul and I, we're still great friends. We're very happy you're here all the way from Boston. But it was touch and go, Paul. So now this is your next story.
That was very early on in my career. Just a tiny bit later, I wrote a book with 2 other colleagues about logo, and it was around the time of E.T. Remember E.T.? It was very impressionable.
This is this
image. And stories about visitors from outer space who basically had good intentions other than bad intentions. So we had this little character who landed from outer space, and the only way to teach him, I'm sure it was him, how Earth worked, was to get him to write logo programs to explain it. This was fantastic. 2 weeks after it was published, some chairperson of the Texas school board phoned us up and said, we'd like to mandate your book for every child in Texas at a certain age. So I and my 2 co-authors cracked open several bottles of champagne on several sequential days. And all was very well. We were counting literally, we would have been millions and millions of pounds. When suddenly another phone call came through and said, we're terribly sorry to tell you that it's all fallen through. Why has it fallen through? It's fallen through because the moral majority committee of the textbook subcommittee in Texas doesn't believe in encouraging children to believe in the supernatural. This is a school book where it's mandatory to teach children about rapture. You know, rapture, the world reach down and cast into, yes. So that's okay, but our £2 million end up in smoke.
Oh, okay. So, yeah. I've got to, this is a bit more serious, but only a little bit more serious. But I wanted a chance for me to talk about, there's Lulu, and there's also Dietmar, who is here somewhere too. Dietmar. Now, actually, I've known Dietmar a long, long while, because he was at the Institute even before me, weren't you? You're right. Even so, when Harvey appointed me, Dietmar was here. But we had these projects which was looking at proof and proving in school mathematics. And what we did was we used multi-level modelling, because you've just met Harvey Goldstein. He's a very formidable character, and his main statistical method was multi-level modelling. We all had to learn it. And I do remember, actually, and Steve Potsy, you were also learning multi-level, and we all did it, and it gave us a huge amount of power to see what the main factors that affected students' understanding of proof. Well, I want to tell just a tiny anecdote with Dietmar. We did a longitudinal study, so we followed the students up. It was fantastic. If anybody wants a data set, I've got it up in our office. It's like this. And we kept modelling. We put in free school meals. We put in Key Stage 2, SATs results. We put in all the things that might affect their proof scores. And then we found out which schools were doing much better than expected, outliers. And there was this one school, 67. I made that number up, but it was something like 67 that kept coming out better than anywhere else. And we couldn't understand it. And we used to go and do case studies. We did multiple different methods. So we were proper social science researchers, and there's school 67, and then Dietmar and I said, we're both going to go to school 67 and find out what is it at school 67. That's year 8, year 9, year 10, better than anywhere else, and also making more progress. This must be an amazing school. So off we went to this school. It was in a beautiful area, and we interviewed the staff. They were very good teachers, but it wasn't absolutely stunning. And then we started talking to the kids. And then we found out every kids kept saying, well, my mother used to talk about that.
when we talked about proving and understanding, or my father did. And then we discovered why School 67 was so good, that our multi-level models had not shown. That very near the school was Kinetic, which was the government defence establishment. It actually employed more PhDs in maths and science, women and men, than anywhere else. So every now and again, well, you have to do your quantitative stuff. That's what it's all about. Exactly. Thank you. So and now we're going to have a little interval because Martin has already mentioned fun and games, and actually so we thought we might need a little break. And so I did fun and games. Actually, I did it with Johnny Ball for 1 year, and then this guy here, Rob Buckman, for 3 years. It was, Channel 3, big hit. You were going to say something?
Well, the people seriously used to run across the road asking for Celia's autograph.
No, but
we once got on a plane to Mexico, and a guy with a very official suit from British Airways came and said to Celia, "How many business class seats are there on a British Airways 747? She said, "I don't know." And he said, "The answer's fun and games. Here's your upgrade."
So, on that note, we thought we'd have a little break where we're going to set you a puzzle. Now, unfortunately, in this room, there are rather a lot of good maths people. So if you are a good maths person, you're not to shout out the answer. Fun and games was for everybody. It was prime time, 7 o'clock, so the idea was everybody had a go. And my job was to say, if you only thought about it this way, mathematically, everything will be clear, which, as Martin very eloquently said, it didn't often happen, and it was something not good. But to begin, we'll have a tiny bit of music. I'm going to try and make this go. Now, that's just the intro to get you in the mood. And now I'm going to select a puzzle. And what Rob used to do was just set the puzzle. He just said what it was, sometimes twice, and no hints. And then everybody went to go and say, right, what do you think? That's what my job was. So I'm going to set the puzzle. You are then going to go out and get yourself another glass.
Yeah, but remember, you're only allowed to go out for 2 minutes.
Oh, I didn't know that. Well, that's 2 minutes, so... Well, we're going to have the aeroplane puzzle.
2 minutes.
Listen, go away and get yourself another glass of bubbly and decide, and then we'll come back and...
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
I don't know if anyone's got the answer.
Well, I'm going to... Actually, could I ask you, we'll do a fun and games. Who thinks it takes the same time? Put your hand up. Same time. Same time. Put your hands up. You've got to do one or the other. You can't say, I don't know. Now, actually, am I connected? I'm not connected. Has anybody got a microphone? I'm good. Okay. I have to say that my dear friend Harvey Goldstein said that just now. He said there's so many assumptions in that puzzle. I say, he did. So I'm just going to very quickly say, who says the same? Put your hand up. We do maths by vote. You've got to do something.
Where's Kathy?
You can't not vote. No, okay. Who says more? Or less? Who says less? Okay. I'm just going to show you the end of the. I'm going to show you the end of the PowerPoint slide. I'm sorry it's terribly cheesy, Martin, but we're going to do it. And then we're going to just do another about 10 minutes just showing some other highlights. I don't know where the microphone's. Ah, it's here.
You're wearing it.
But it's not working.
It is working.
Is it? Okay.
It just streams. It doesn't work for the people here.
Right. Could. Right. No, it doesn't depend on the distance. No, I'm afraid it doesn't.
It doesn't depend on the distance. Now, I'm going to do a bit more of the landmark very fast.
And this has already been mentioned, this landmark. And I just have to give you a bit of the inside information. Because there's Michel Artigue, who very kindly is here today. We did a report on continuing professional development. It was terribly important, we all said. And we didn't know, we went to the conference hall just opposite the DFE, and we had this meeting, and Michelle came, and Jeremy Kilpatrick came from the States, and we were having a big thing about it, and we didn't know what Charles Clarke would say. But he came in, and he then said, right, we're going to have, he gave the recommendations to Sir Adrian Smith, Professor Adrian Smith, and that was when the National Centre for Excellence was born, after that. And it was such a dramatic moment, and I'm very pleased to say that some of my colleagues, Jane Ivry and others, are here from the National Centre, and it's still going strong, doing different things from when I was the boss, but that's all good. So that was a big moment, waiting for Charles Clarke to come. And now we're going to go, this is, oh, you're going to do this.
I'm just going to take you behind the scenes at a momentous moment in our lives, and especially Celia's life. This is when she was awarded the Freudenthal Medal, and it took place in Copenhagen. Freudenthal Medal was is the highest honour in mathematics education. And at the same time as she was presented with the Freudenthal Medal, next slide, Guy Brousseau from France received the Klein Medal, which was for people who had already made their contribution and had ceased working, gainfully employed. And all was going extremely well when the French ambassador invited us both into the French embassy for canapes and champagne, very good champagne, I have to say. And it was fantastic. And he went along the line speaking French to everybody, naturally. And it suddenly dawned on, oh, but then I watched Celia shaking hands, Guy Brousseau shaking hands with the French ambassador. All was well, French was being spoken, and suddenly it dawned on me, and I think Lulu was sitting next to me at the time, the awful truth, which was that any second Celia would be called upon to speak French. And I tell you now, of the many things that have been said about Celia this evening, all of which are true, and all are magnificent achievements, but you wouldn't necessarily include in that list of achievements a facility with language, especially the French language. Thank God, goodness, at the moment when the French ambassador actually touched base with Celia and shook her hand, he said in the most perfect English, I'm so delighted for you, congratulations. But it was pretty close to me.
Now I think it's me. I just need to speak just a little bit. It's already been mentioned that Richard opened this lab, and this is him opening the lab, and we all came. This building was an absolute derelict, and we made it, Richard designed it, and he also helped design this wonderful poster, which is this door opening, a window on new knowledge, and it was very, very exciting. But now, the next slide is that Seymour Papert came over from MIT to speak at the lab, and this is what he said. Richard.
The K word, the knowledge, is back, and it still is the same. I think if you look around the world of education now, there are all kinds of tributaries to the main channel of what it is that people are learning and why they should learn it, which are often neglected in favour of, I had an email the other day talking about skills and competences in mathematics. I have no idea what that might mean. So Seymour was very taken by this. He just stood up and he said, the K word is back. And I think I've lost track of how many times people have said to me over the years, why did you call it the knowledge lab and not the learning lab or the teaching lab or the education lab? And the answer is because the K word is what's really important. Sorry for this kind of moral diversion. Let me tell you a story about 10 years later when we had a visit from the Chancellor of the University of London. I haven't gone completely royalist in my old age. She is the Chancellor of the University of London. It just so happens that her mother is well known to us all. And she went on a tour of about a dozen projects that we had set up in this lab. Lots and lots of terribly overdressed lecturers and researchers trying to be good and trying to answer questions. She, I have to say, was absolutely amazing and really grasped all the things we were telling her and came back asking very good questions. And one of the projects we were all very fond of in the lab was run by Kashka, who's disappeared. Kashka. And she had a researcher who was helping her build let's just say a system for helping children with autism cope better in communication. So a kind of autistic tutor. And the the people for whom it was designed were 6 or 7 years old. So I said, well, Your Royal Highness, this is designed for young children here, and James is going to demonstrate and be one of the children. How old are you, James? And James looked at her and said, 29. And she thought this was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. I have to say, it was quite amusing. Right, okay.
Now, as well as doing stuff with computers and maths and all that sort of stuff in schools, we did have a bit of a deviation a few years ago when we started doing the banking project. And I must just say a little bit about the banking project. I think I'm doing this, am I?
You are now.
We were over in mathematical sciences, and in those days we had PAs, being professors. And so the PAs suddenly came running to see us and said, we've had a phone call from the boss of the Swiss Bank Corporation. And this is honestly was true. I said, crikey, what on earth is a Swiss Bank Corporation? So I said, oh, he's got a child, and he needs a bit of tutoring. And you said...
I have no idea what I said.
I thought you said, oh, he wants to give some lots of money. Well, anyway, the upshot of it was, we did do a lot of work, working in the Swiss Bank Corporation in the city. We used to go there the first thing in the morning with our sharp suits on, and guess what we taught them? We taught them logo.
Well, I should point out that the banking crisis was about 6 months later.
Anyway.
But then he called you sooner.
I do want to just, this was Rudy Bonny, who we did invite, who's become a friend of ours, who was the boss of the Swiss Bank. And Lulu did some work with us on the bank. She didn't look like that. She didn't look like that. And Steve Ponzi, who's here somewhere. Sorry, Stefano. He came with us, and this is John Wood, who's also here. There. There's John. Yeah. So we all went to the Swiss Bank and we taught the logo. We didn't do turtle geometry, we did more modelling the financial instruments. But the whole idea is that these bankers should understand a bit more what they were doing. They didn't know that much. But anyway, so that's... Now, I just want to... Am I going to do it just very briefly? People mentioned I've got these 2 awards. Now, when you get an award with somebody from the royal family, you're allowed... You go forward a step. They say something to you. You say something to them. And then they shake the hands and it pushes you back. Now, when I said to the Queen... The little query behind her ear said, this is for mathematics, Your Royal Highness. So she said, this is for mathematics, congratulations. And I said to her, oh, Your Royal Highness, do you like mathematics? And guess what she said? What did she say? What do you think she said? Oh, no, I don't.
One doesn't.
One doesn't. Like.
One doesn't.
Then you're pushed back slightly. Now, when it came a bit later to Prince William, I did exactly the same. I said to Prince William, Your Royal Highness, do you like mathematics? And he said, no, that's not my thing. But I, by that time, had plucked up courage to say something else to him, which I'm not really supposed to. I said, but I knew that he had a son called Prince George. So I said, isn't it important for Prince George to understand a bit of mathematics? Sir? You say sir the second time? Anyway, he said, absolutely it is. And he says, maybe I'll give you a call.
So I don't know if Glyn from our finance department is here, but we will be applying for a costing.
There's just, this is you. I've often wanted to know, this is David Willits, who is the minister.
I just want to quickly tell this story because there's a moral for us all trying to work with policymakers and researchers and so on. This is David Willits, who has no business being a Conservative. He's actually a brilliant guy. And he arrived clutching at the final event of the Technology Enhanced Learning Research Programme, £12 million research programme, and all was going extremely well. It was happening in the Royal Society. There were about 500 people there. When David Willits turned up with 4 scruffy little bits of paper, and I said, nice to see that you're in the 21st century as far as technology is concerned, David. And he laughed, and then he looked at my screen and laughed even more deeply because the whole machine had crashed. And the moral of the story is don't do anything live with children, animals, or computers.
I don't know whether Julia Hassar is here, but we thought she was coming from Hong Kong. But we have had this very lively it's still going on. And I just wanted to pick it out, A, because Julia, who funded it from the Lee Cushing Foundation, which is an extremely rich foundation, I wanted to thank her. But we also, there is, in this picture, there's Liz Truss who came, who was our minister. And there's James O'Toole, that many would know of him. I don't know whether he could come, but he was our administrator, he was wonderful. And there's Alison, where you are. And our final,
No, just two final slides, then we're done. This was a wonderful but sad occasion at MIT earlier this year, in memory of Seymour Papert, who, as you know, passed away not long ago. And we were with him when he suffered his terrible accident in Hanoi 7 or 8 years before he died. We were very proud of ourselves, honoured that we were, I think, the only European people invited to that event. And it really took us full circle from where we started 66 collective years ago, round to now. And I have to say that even now, I read stuff about technology and learning, and I realize, stuff that I've written, and I realize that actually I was just regurgitating stuff that Seymour had taught me. Okay, so I'm going to finish on a much lighter note, and this is a story about how two people can relate with each other and work together as one. I was a member of an editorial board or a conference organization with several people in this room, one of whom is Jenny Sendova. Here she is from Bulgaria, Sofia. And there was an incredibly long and drawn-out process on email about how many plenary keynote speakers should there be, how long should they have, should there be a fair representation across continents. You can just imagine. And I'm not one of those people, actually, I have to confess, who's very tolerant of those kind of discussions. But I just watched it going around. And then suddenly, and the consensus seemed to be there'd be 5 or 6 keynote speakers. And suddenly Seymour sent emails saying, I'm coming to the conference. So that was one slot taken up with keynote speakers. And Jenny said, well, I think we should only have one more speaker. I can't go through this any longer. We'll have Seymour, and we'll have one other person. That's Celia and Richard. That's it. Thank you all.
So can we invite Jenny, who's just featured there, to...
See how well prepared I am. Directly from the airport, from Sofia, and I have just the same picture with the Eurologo poster where you have Seymour plus this one person, Celia and Richard. And so there is an official address by the Bulgarian Union of Mathematicians celebrating them as their foreign fellows, saying how great internationally recognized and inspirational educators they are, but I'm not going to read the official stuff. I would like only to rephrase the story of Celia with the Queen, because this is what I told to 100, maybe 200 Bulgarian teachers when they were introduced for being delivered with this Bulgarian medal. So I slightly decorated the story because I remembered that you, Celia, forgot the only thing, that you are not expected to speak the first. And that's what I remember. So at least I said that Celia, forgetting with her wonderful mathematical hat and elegant dress, forgot that she's not expected to speak the first and said, Your Majesty, when at school, did you like math? And Her Majesty the Queen stepped back in disgust, total disgust, and said, oh, no. At which all the Bulgarian audience laughed. But Celia and Richard looked at me and said, now, Jenny, that you can speak perfect English, why don't you? Just speak because of my invitation with, oh, no.
Thank you very much, Jenny. As you can imagine, when Lulu and I were asked by Celia and Richard to make this event happen, we knew we'd have no control. We knew we needed to wait the iterations of slides and order of play. 152 slides. And so we slightly had to be a little bit surreptitious around our tributes to you. So first of all, can we invite the PhD students choir to come to the front?
Where is the actual choir?
It's Tony's on.
You all have to be professional singers. This is the Knowledge Lab Choral Society, which was founded at about 20 past 5 this
Here comes Dame Celia, she loves expressive media, she likes reading my soul, she got reciprocal windows, she got techno-mathematical literacy, thinking in change, ain't that so plain to see? There goes old Mop-Top, he likes meaning making, he does logo turtle shapes and shaped by webbing, he say, what's your elevator pitch right here? All around and see me when you've got it more clear, working together right here since '84. Or 5. Working together now for all these years. Milk bottles, cauliflower, passports and tears. He says, I never met a day like you. You wind up your digit like you make your hair do. Working together right here since '84 or 5. Take it away, Rose. Thank you for giving also things you've been giving. Situate abstraction as a template for living. It's time to ease your way out of here. So have a merry scratch maths and a happy new year. Working together right here since '84 or 5.
has started with this book, which we have already stuck some of the messages, and maybe other people would like to add to it as the evening goes on.
And just some small mementos from your PhD. I reckon it's a
if we send email messages, can you
Yes.
get them in the book?
Yes,
That'd
yes,
be great.
yes,
Thank
yes,
you.
To Celia Richard.
Celia Richard.
Welcome to mingle around, but we have my 150 PowerPoint slides. We'll feature some of you, but they're going to be going around on a loop. So do what you want to mingle. Don't sit and watch them, but we will, if you want to see them, it's up to you.